We'll be in Joshua chapter 23. Joshua 23. You bow your head, we'll have a word of prayer. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful for another day, but especially for this day, this first day of the week. We're thankful for this quiet time that we have to study. Pray that you'd bless our efforts, Holy Father, as we consider the things that were written long ago in the book of Joshua. In Jesus' name, amen. And it came to pass after many days, when Jehovah had given rest unto Israel from all their enemies round about. You think about this rest that was given. You go back a few chapters, and you can see toward the end of chapter 11, that the land had rest from war, and then the list of the kings in chapter 12. 31 kings that were smitten by Joshua and those that he led into battle. And since that time, since the land has had rest, many days have passed. So again, we think about these time periods in the lives, and then we'll come to the end of the book and we'll see Joshua dying at 110. So he's about 85 when the land finally has rest. So we might think of Joshua going into retirement at 85, maybe from the military duties that he had, but not from the leader that he was and from the encouragement that he wanted to be to his family and to his people. And we can see that in the latter days of his life as we're getting ready to read here in chapter 23. And Joshua was old, verse 1, and he was well stricken in years. Joshua called for all Israel, for the elders and their heads and their judges, for all their officers, and said, I am old and well stricken in years. So again, we may take a lesson from Joshua. If it's good enough for Joshua to refer to himself as I'm old and well stricken in years, then maybe it's okay that when we're talking with one another, we kind of feel like, you know what, I feel old this morning and well stricken in years. But then, as we began to think about this last week, we bring up the point again that here is a man that seemingly was just a child, about the same age of Caleb. Just a child when Moses leaves. Probably, if he's young enough, he don't even know who Moses is yet. He's still being reared in a house. But at some point in time, he becomes like a teenager. He becomes 20. At some point in time, the name Moses comes up. But Moses isn't here anymore. He left. I've heard about what Joseph said. Somebody's told me about that. But all I'm knowing during pretty much the first 40 years of my life is the same thing that Caleb experienced in the first 40 years of his life and everybody else that's growing up and being born in Egypt, and that is bondage. But at some point in time, this man, Moses, comes back. And then Joshua, just like Caleb and just like the rest of the people that were led out, go through this experience of these plagues. And finally the day comes where they walk out of Egypt. And he's about 40. And he is going to be given a special duty and a special charge where he is a tutor, where he is a servant to a great man named Moses. And he will serve under him faithfully during those 40 years of wandering. And then he's going to have the charge to lead the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, in the conquering of the land of Canaan. And now there is this settling, occupying. And he's going to enjoy that now for 25 years, give or take. And when he has these last opportunities to share things with the children of Israel and the people that he still has the influence on, he's talking about certain things. There are certain things he doesn't have time to deal with anymore. He doesn't have time to deal with politics. He doesn't have time to deal with sports. He doesn't have time to deal with the weather. Doesn't even bring attention to his past accomplishments, which no doubt he had accomplished great things as their leader. That's not what's important here. I've only got a few days left. I've only got a number of breaths left to take. And with the breaths that I have and the days that I have, Here's the most important thing I need to share with you. This is what you need to remember. So the elders are called, the heads, the judges, the officers. He says in verse 3, you have seen all that Jehovah your God hath done unto these nations because of you. For Jehovah your God, he it is that hath fought for you. Behold, I have allotted unto you these nations that remain, to be an inheritance for your tribes from the Jordan, with all the nations that I have cut off, even unto the great sea, the Mediterranean, the border to the west, toward the going down of the sun. And Jehovah your God, he will thrust them out from before you and drive them from out of your sight. And you shall possess their land, as Jehovah your God spake unto you. Therefore, be very, the American Standard has the word courageous. What about your rendering? Tell me? Strong. Any other word there?
Firm.
Tell me?
Firm.
Is that all the versions say be courageous? Any of them say cautious? Well, the idea of cautious is actually a part of that word courageous. Be cautious, courageous, firm, strong. Be mindful to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. Now he refers back to what? The Pentateuch, the first 5, specifically the laws of that you turn not aside therefrom to the right hand or to the left. That you come not among these nations, these that remain among you, neither make mention of the name of their gods, nor cause to swear by them, neither serve them, nor bow down yourselves to them. Notice in verse 6, be very courageous. That's one thing I need you to do. And verse 8 says, you also need to cleave. And we've looked at that idea before as well. The idea to cleave. Be courageous, cleave unto Jehovah your God, as ye have done unto this day. For Jehovah had driven out before you great nations and strong. We looked at that. It wasn't based upon the military expertise of the Israelites as far as why they had success in these battles. They went up against greater nations. They went up against greater warriors, stronger, maybe even better suited for war when they came against them with horses and chariots. But it's Jehovah that's driven out these great nations before you. But as for you, remember that no man hath stood before you unto this day. One man, why can you be courageous? Why can you show courage? Because one man of you shall chase 1,000. He's simply repeating here something that God had actually said to him. One shall chase 1,000. For Jehovah your God, he it is that fighteth for you, as he spake unto you. Take good heed, therefore, unto yourselves, that you love Jehovah your God. Else, if you do it all, go back and cleave unto the remnant of these nations, even these that remain among you, and make marriages with them, and go in unto them, and they unto you. Know for a certainty that Jehovah your God will no more drive out these nations from out of your sight. But now we see what they will be. If you don't do what the Lord says, they will be a snare. They will be a trap. They will be a scourge, a snare and a trap, a scourge in your sides, a thorn in your eyes, until you perish from off this good land which Jehovah your God hath given you. And then he says, behold, this day I am going the way of all the earth. I do not know if what's implied by this day meant that Joshua knew that that particular day he was going to die, but this day just not referred to sometime really soon. Behold, this day I am going the way of all the earth, the same way that we all will go if the Lord allows us to live long enough. It is appointed unto man once to die. And you know, in all your hearts and in all your souls, verse 14, that not one thing hath failed of all the good things which Jehovah your God spake concerning you. All are come to pass unto you, not one thing hath failed thereof. Tell me from verse 14 how we might take comfort in the words that Joshua spoke on that day to those people regarding this particular characteristic of God. How does that help us?
We can have assurance of our salvation if we obey.
Okay, so we can have assurance of our salvation because we obeyed the commands of God. What else? Is there anything we're told in the New Testament that might parallel what he's just said here? What about that idea of forsake? Is there something that says, so be ye free from the love of money, content with such things as you have, for himself has said, I will in no wise fail thee, neither will I in any wise forsake thee. Remember when Jesus gave the Great Commission? Remember what he says at the end of Matthew chapter 28, the very last words, and I will be with you always. Yes, spoken specifically at that time to those disciples that he's getting ready to ascend from, but also a very generic statement made to all his people until when? Until the end of the ages, until the end of the world. So here's Joshua, and he's able to now look back over his lifetime. Again, we just briefly touched on that to begin, but you can just imagine what this life has been like for Joshua. What a life! The things he has seen. The difficulties that Moses had in regards to the people. The times in which God wanted to wipe the people out and saw Moses step up for the people and says, no, don't do that. But I'll make of you a nation. Don't do that. All these lessons that Joshua has learned throughout all his life, and he's coming down to this point in his life, and he's on his last few breaths, last days of life, and he's reminding the people, listen, God hadn't failed you in one point. And what's implied there is if you'll continue to be faithful to him, he's not saying it's going to be easy. He's not saying you're not going to get sick. He's not saying you're not going to have financial woes and hardships. He's not saying things aren't going to go wrong in the family. He's not saying tragedy might not happen. But in regards to the eternal purposes of God taking care of you, God's not going to fail you in one point. That's what he said then. Still applies to us today. We serve the same God. It came to pass, verse 15, it shall come to pass that as all the good things that are come upon you, which Jehovah your God spake unto you, so will Jehovah bring upon you all the evil things, until he hath destroyed you from all this good land, which Jehovah your God hath given you. When you transgress the covenant of Jehovah your God, when you sin, when you practice that, when you do those things which he commanded you, and you go and serve other gods, you give yourself over to idolatry, you bow down yourselves to them, then will the anger of Jehovah be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off the good land which he hath given unto you. Comments on chapter 23? Yes, sir, Brother George.
I thought when you go back to verse 7, when he says, neither make mention of the name. Just in passing conversation, don't even bring these things up. And sometimes we need to be mindful that, familiarity not only breeds contempt, but it make it easier to start accepting things. And we face a lot of that in society today. Homosexuality is, something that used to be an abomination to society, but is now, when we speak of it, now we're looked down upon.
Brother George makes an excellent point from the standpoint of how it applies to us today. Even then, there today, you think about, okay, you stay free of these people. You don't have anything to do with them. In fact, don't even to mention them by name. To mention them by name means I have had to at least become somewhat familiar with them. I've had a conversation with somebody in regards to that. He's saying, no, you stay completely separate and apart from that. And you think about all the things that we could find out about in this world, even in the religious world. We could spend our time trying to figure out how we're going to argue against that particular doctrine, against that particular doctrine, so forth and so on. And I'm not saying that we may not at some point in time need to become familiar if we're going to have a conversation with someone who believes a certain thing. But do you remember when Paul came to Athens? And you remember when he walked around Athens, what did he see? What was the thing that really grabbed his attention? Yeah, but in addition to that, what did he just see in general? Just idols of every sort. And at some point in time, what is he given an opportunity to do? To preach. And nowhere in there do I see that prior to that time, he took some time so he could learn what he could about all these different idols that these people believed in. Nothing said about that. And when he's given the very first opportunity, guess where he starts preaching? The gospel. He just starts with what's going to save people. So obviously, in a very similar sense, he kept himself free of those things. Didn't take a whole lot of time. Didn't see it worth his while to understand why they were offering things to this particular god or this particular god. He saw it. He couldn't help but see it. He's walking around the city and observed it. So George, it's a good point in regards to all those things that might in some way distract us and lead us away from what we really should be focusing on. And if we think about that, and the point that he's made, that is simply a weapon of Satan. Because anything Satan can do to get our attention away from what is most important is definitely something we need to be cautious of. Anything else? Chapter 24, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, called for the elders of Israel, their heads, and for their judges, and for their officers. You think about this gathering. We have these meetings that happen amongst the world rulers in various places, and when it does, we can't even fathom what it takes to make all that happen with all the security and stuff, but the importance of all these people coming together, no doubt in the eyes of the common people, wow, something's happening here. Look at all these important people that are coming together at Shechem to listen to Joshua. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said unto all the people. Now, as we read the next few verses, I just want you to, if you haven't done it already, as we go through here, I may point out a few things, but at some point you go back through here and you read through this, I want you to see how much history is summarized in just brief statements. And if you'll take those brief statements and read them and then pause, then stretch your mind and exercise your mind to go back and kind of think, oh, wow, that's really talking about these things that happened. But notice, and I'll point out something else, we don't typically think of Joshua as a prophet, but he was. Prophet simply means a mouthpiece for God. God spoke to someone, and then that someone conveyed to the people what God spoke to him. And Joshua said unto all the people, thus saith Jehovah, the God of Israel. These are the things that God has said to me, reminded me, and now I am going to remind you. Your fathers dwelt of old time beyond the river, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. What are we told here, and only here? Had we read, which we did, I'm not sure how long ago because of COVID, but we did study Genesis at one point in time, and the calling of Abraham out of his native land. But Moses doesn't go into any kind of detail regarding the religious practices of his father. But Joshua here is telling us something through inspiration about Abraham's father and Nahor's father, and that was what? What were they? They were idolaters. Terah, Nahor, they served other gods. Abraham was removed from that environment. And I took your father Abraham beyond the river and led him throughout all the land of Canaan. Again, as we read through this, just think about what's going to happen. I multiplied his seed and I gave him Isaac. See, when it just says I gave him Isaac, you just got to stop for a second. Think, okay, wait a minute. He just didn't give him Isaac. I mean, there was a lot involved in giving him Isaac, was there not? You had Abram, marrying Sarai, half brother, half sister, right? You have all the things that happened to them, the trouble that they got in, him telling her to habitually lie as far as her relationship to him, because it's his fear. Finally, at some point in their life, they can't have children, and so they take Hagar and say, here. And then we have Ishmael born at 86, and then God says, well, no, this isn't the son of promise. You're going to have a son, and that's going to all happen, and it does when Abraham is 90 and Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90. That's all in that. I gave him Isaac. And I gave Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. And so you're thinking about, well, wow, you gave Isaac. Well, that's marrying Rebekah. And they're married at 40. And she doesn't have Jacob and Esau until 60, 20 years before those children are born. And we remember that. Who's born first? Esau, and Jacob is doing what? Hanging on to his heel, one that supplants. And you have Jacob taking away the promise, the birthright first, and then with the help of his mother, taking away the promise. And then doing what? Fleeing for his life. Seemingly never to see his mother again. By the time he returns, she's no longer. All that and more in the simple statement, I gave unto Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. And I gave unto Esau Mount Seir to possess it. And Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. You see that? Well, there's more to that. Because you have the 12 sons of Jacob, one of which ended up being a favorite. One that he made a coat of a number of colors. Joseph. And then Joseph is the one that ends up in Egypt, not by choice. Right? And he's going to be there in prison. He's going to be in the house of Potiphar 13 years before at 30 years of age. Brought out of prison, stands before Pharaoh. This is what you better do. And Pharaoh says, okay, here's my ring. You do it. And he begins to do that. 7 years of plenty. And then the famine starts. And then guess who shows up? His family. And then through a process of time, guess who moves down and settles in the land of Goshen? His family, 70, 75. That and more, all summed up in the statement as far as Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. And then I sent Moses. Well, wait a minute. Moses had been in Egypt. He was born there. He was found by Pharaoh's daughter, raised as an Egyptian. But at some point, he couldn't do it anymore. I'm not an Egyptian. I'm an Israelite. And after he committed murder, flees for his life. 40 years, what's he do? What's his occupation? He's a shepherd. Marries, has a couple of children, and at 80 years of age, God calls him and says, go back. I've heard the cry of my people. So he goes back with the help of Aaron, and you have all that and more. I sent Moses and Aaron. I plagued Egypt. Boy, did he ever. According to that which I did in the midst thereof. And afterward I brought you out. Yes, he did. And I brought your fathers out of Egypt. And you came into the sea. That would be what sea? The Red Sea. And the Egyptians pursued after your fathers with chariots, with horsemen into the Red Sea. And when they, the children of Israel, cried out unto Jehovah, what did he do? He put darkness between you and the Egyptians. And you can read about that. Because that darkness has to do with how they were being led. Who, capital W, who they were being led by. Someone who during the day appeared as a cloud and at night as a pillar of fire. That's leading them. That's led them up to the Red Sea. And here come the Egyptians. And it's nighttime. And the seas are going to depart. And they're going to walk through on dry ground. But in order to have time to do that, who that is leading them removes himself and goes behind them. And on the Egyptian side, he puts darkness. And on the Israelite side, that are going to cross the Red Sea, he puts light. The who, capital W, the one who stands between light and darkness, is deity, is God. He put darkness between you and the Egyptians and brought the sea upon them and covered them, and your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. I've got to stop for a second. He's talking to people who said, you saw what I did in Egypt. Well, yes, because I could have been 15 years of age when Moses shows up. And I'm going to live through the plagues. And then he leads us out, and I'm with my family. And then because of something that happens, I end up hearing it's because of disbelief. I've been wandering around in this wilderness for 40 years. I'm now 55. And I've seen a lot of people die. And now Moses is dead. Aaron's dead. Miriam's dead. But here's this guy Joshua, and he has led us into the land of Canaan. I am one of these who saw what God did in Egypt. And notice, I'm reminded that you dwelt in the wilderness. It's kind of like you went on vacation in the wilderness. It was more than that. It was more than that. It was difficult time for them. Think of all the graves. 600,000 plus graves they would have dug. If you look at the men of war and the numberings before and after. I brought you into the land of the Amorites. Now we're coming into the land. Joshua's leading us in. We're coming in right to left. We're still on the east side of the Jordan. I brought you into the land of the Amorites that dwelt beyond the Jordan. And they fought with you. And I gave them into your hand, and you possessed their land, and I destroyed them from before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against you. He did not rise and fight a physical battle with them. When he decided to fight against them, he called for somebody to come and help him, not to physically fight a battle. Who did he call for? Balaam. And then, of course, as soon as we say Balaam, we begin to think about everything we know about that. Oh, yeah, I remember when he got called. And he sent the first people back, and the second contingent came. They had a better offer. And then God says, okay, you go with them. And then there was this experience he had talking with something, a donkey, and the donkey talking with him. And then he saw someone, capital O-N-E, he saw someone, not just an angel with a sword, someone. So Balaam's the one that's called, and he comes to curse the people, but he goes, what? He blessed you. I wasn't going to let him do that. He blessed you, and I delivered you out of his hand. Now, he was successful later on. Remember, we looked at that even last week in regard to the Baal Peor and the idolatry and the thing that happened there. And, of course, Phinehas was someone who rose to the occasion there and stayed the Lord's hand in regard to a plague. You went over the Jordan. Think of that statement. You went over the Jordan. They just didn't go over the Jordan. They came to the Jordan, and it was at flood stages. And you're going to pass over, and it's like, really? How are we supposed to do this? Well, here's how it's going to happen. The priests are going to carry that Ark of the Covenant, and you're going to stay a half mile back. You're going to stay a half mile away from it. And that Ark of the Covenant represented who? God. The presence of God. Because when God spoke to Moses, where did he speak to Moses? When Moses spoke to God, where did he go to speak to God? Into the tabernacle, into the place where this Ark of the Covenant. So they put it on their shoulders, and they step into the Red Sea, some distance. We don't know exactly how far. But at some point in time, as they seemingly just step into the River Jordan, what does it do? It congeals. It stands back as a heap, wide enough for all these people to remain a half a mile in either direction on the Ark of the Covenant and pass over the river. You think they just didn't do that when the river dried up. They were supposed to take 12 stones from the river and carry them over for a ladder purpose. And then they were supposed to take 12 stones and put them what? Put them back in the river as a reminder. So you had those things connected with this statement, what? That you passed over the Jordan. You came to Jericho. We remember about that, chapter 6. But then you read that statement that the men of Jericho fought against you. And if you go back and read chapter 6, you didn't read anything about a battle. You read about them going around the city once, going around the city once, and then finally 7 times blowing, shouting, and walls did what? And we just think when the walls fell flat, what? They won. What do you think the people of Jericho did when the walls fell? What do you think they had been preparing for, seeing these people march around? You think they just went home and said, well, nothing's going to happen? They're prepared for what? And when the walls fell down, if you were a soldier or a warrior, what are you going to do? You're going to fight for your life. All we know is they were utterly destroyed. Back in Joshua 6. Here, though, it says that they fought. Not only did they fight against you, so did the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Girgashite, Hivite, Jebusite. But I delivered them into your hand, and I sent the hornet before you. And remember, we talked about this before. And we decided to just trust what the Bible says in regard to what that hornet is. And that is what? Hornets. Have you ever seen movies or... Jude and I were just watching something yesterday. It's a pretty good movie. Woody Woodpecker. Kind of like modern. Kind of Woody with people. And at some point in time, because he's trying to stop something from happening, Woody Woodpecker brought a hornet's nest and just dropped it amongst some construction workers. What do you think the construction workers did when that hornet nest dropped and the hornets decided to get excited? They ran for their life. You ever had a bee or a wasp chasing you? You just stand there and go ahead, bite. You start wailing and running, right? Well, can you imagine in the form of even like a plague? If you think about the magnitude of the plagues, if God sent hornets before the people, what that would have been like if you would have been the people? I sent the hornet before you, drove out before you, even the 2 kings of the Amorites, not with sword, not with bow. I gave you this land. You didn't labor for this land. I gave you cities. You didn't build these cities. I gave you vineyards, olive yards. You never planted anything. I gave those things to you. Now, therefore, what does he say? In light of this amazing history in God and what he has done for you, take it all into consideration. Fear him. Reverence him. Be in awe of him. Serve him. Serve him in sincerity. Put your heart into it. Even if your effort in some ways falls short. Serve him with all your heart. And do it in truth. Do it in the way he has revealed. Accept that you can't do it any better. You cannot improve upon how he has said he wants to be served. You cannot. Just do it his way. And do it with all your heart. And notice what is still amongst the people. Put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and Egypt, and serve ye Jehovah. If it seem evil unto you to serve Jehovah, choose you this day. Now we have, again, the ability either to choose to serve, or I can choose not to. That's what God has given me the ability to do. He's made it plain. He's made it evident. But I still can choose. Joshua wants them to choose God, but he says, choose you this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your fathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. We had noted before that the Bible doesn't tell us anything in regard to Joshua's wife. We noted before it doesn't say anything in regard to the children of Joshua. None of them are given names. The Bible doesn't do it. So we don't know if he had a family. We talked about that, I believe, as we began the book of Joshua. But we said there was a verse, and there's a statement in a verse that seems to imply that he had both. And it's this one. Because in this statement, he concludes this by saying, but as for me and my house, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. That statement, as it's rendered in English, it almost just implies like this is what we're going to do in regards to the future. But the Hebrew word is different there. The Hebrew word expresses what he had already been doing. In other words, we have been serving the Lord, and we're going to keep serving the Lord. And the people answered and said, far be it from us, in light of what has just presented to me, if I was a part of that crowd, how could I say anything different? Far be it from me that we should forsake God to serve Jehovah, to serve other gods. He brought us out. He brought our fathers out in verse 17 from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. He did these great signs in our sight. He preserved us in all the way, even in the wilderness, food, water, in a desert, among all the peoples that we passed through. He drove out from among us all the people, even these Amorites that dwell in the land. Therefore, we will serve the Lord. There's the statement. And Joshua, just on the heels of what they said, you cannot, in verse 19, you cannot serve Jehovah. Now, is Joshua in some way here trying to discourage them? Is he telling them this is something that is impossible? You cannot? Or is there a condition? Is there something implied here? If you go back up to verse 14, what has he told them they still need to do? They still need to get rid of their idols. In essence, when they make the statement in verse 16, oh, we recognize what God has done for us, so forth and so on, Joshua says in verse 19, well, you cannot serve God and serve idols. You can't do both. That almost sounds like something that the Lord said in the Sermon on the Mount. You cannot serve God and mammon, this world. You can't do both. So what he says there, you cannot serve Jehovah. He's just simply saying, based upon what you're currently doing, you want to continue on what you're doing, you cannot. You know why? Because he's a holy God. He expects you to separate yourself completely from any form of idolatry. He's a jealous God. He wants your commitment to him. He wants your full attention. He wants your full love. Because if you would just continue to think you can do both, he will not forgive your you can't continue to practice idolatry and expect your sins to be forgiven. You cannot. If you forsake Jehovah and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you evil. Remember the blessings and the curse? He will consume you after that you have done good. And the people said unto Joshua, nay, but we will serve Jehovah. They hear what he has to say. They recognize where they're falling short. And I'm telling you what, there's something about their commitment here, as we'll note in a moment. Joshua said unto the people, okay, you are witnesses against yourself. You have what you have chosen to do, to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Now therefore put away, said he, the foreign gods which are among you. Incline your heart unto Jehovah, the God of Israel. And the people said, Jehovah our God we will serve, and unto his voice will we hearken. Made a covenant with the people that day, and they set up a statute. He wrote these words in the book of the law of God. He took that great stone. There's always some kind of stone. At least there was just one here. He set it up on the oak that is by the sanctuary of Jehovah. And Joshua said to the people, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it hath heard all the words of Jehovah which he spake unto us. It shall therefore be a witness against you, lest you deny your God. And Joshua sent away the people, every man into his inheritance. We read that and we just buzz right through it and overlook how difficult that must have been. Joshua is getting ready to die. He's been with some of these people his entire life. He has lived a lifetime of experiences with these people, and on his last leg, these are the things you need to do. And then he sends them away. Watches all these people that he loved walk away, never to see them again. It came to pass after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Jehovah, died, being 110 years old. They buried him in the border of the inheritance of the city in the hill country of Ephraim. And Israel, going back to the statement again in verse 22, when he said, ye are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen to serve Jehovah. That's what they said they're going to do. In other words, we're putting away the idols. You're right. You're right. And we want to have access to God. We want to be able to be forgiven. We're going to serve him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's what we're going to do. Did they mean it? And Israel served Jehovah, verse 31, all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. Yes, they did it. How reassuring that is to us. That no matter how we might have lived up to a point in our life, no matter what it might have happened, that at some point I can come to my senses and I can say I am going to serve the Lord sincerely, in truth. And I can do it because it's been done before. These that had known all the work of Jehovah and all that he had wrought for Israel. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem in the parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, and they became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. And you think about that in the last chapter of Genesis, that statement that we referred to a couple of times, because if we are down in the land of Egypt, subjected to slavery, that's all we've ever known. A mother or a father or a grandfather or somebody has shared with us, but don't forget what Joseph said. What did he say? Joseph said unto his brethren before he died, God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land unto the land which he sware unto Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you. That's what I've been told. That's what I've been hoping in, waiting on. The promise of God, deliverance from bondage. And Joseph says, you shall carry up my bones from hence. And if you go back and look at that, it looks like there was somebody in particular that at least took that charge initially. And here they are, after all this time. The bones now buried in their proper place. But you know, that's not the last time we hear about that parcel of land. Do you remember when Jesus had that conversation with a Samaritan woman by the well? Remember that? John 4. He cometh to the city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. The parcel of land that Joseph inherited had a well on it. A well that Jesus would drink from at some point in time in the future. So Joshua lives to be 110. Joseph lived to be 110. And finally, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died. And they buried him in the hill of Phinehas. So now Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, becomes high priest. They buried Eleazar in the hill of Phinehas, his son, which was given him in the hill of the country of Egypt. Comments on the book of Joshua. We ought to know, we ought not, that we are not to serve anybody but God. That's exactly right. We could keep going to Romans 15 and 4. The things written aforetime were written for our learning, that through patience and comfort of the Scriptures we might have hope. And we can take, again, just what happened in this final 2 chapters. It's encapsulated for us, and be reminded that our service, our duty, all our energy belongs to the God of the heaven and earth. That's exactly right. Anything else? Well, I have one comment. Outstanding. The book of Joshua, just absolutely outstanding. Teaches us so much. We will begin in the book of Judges next week. Look at the next period of history in the Israelites. Thank you so much for the opportunity to teach you the book of Joshua.